So I got tagged in some videos yesterday in response to a couple videos I had posted. And I know this video is going to be kind of long, so just buckle up and, sit tight. But I really want everyone from Gen Z to those baby boomers that are online to really hear what I have to say. I am an older millennial. I was born in 1981, so I am on the precipice of when millennial age started. So my mom, who is a 1960 baby boomer, grew up during the civil rights movement, and she was attending school, particularly public school, at the heights of integration. And overlapping that civil rights movement during the 60s and 70s was the women's rights movement, the second wave of feminism. And during a time where my mom's mom was finally getting access to checking accounts and credit cards and owning property. And also happening during this time frame, from the 50s all the way up into the 90s and into the 21st century, we were seeing milestones in the gay rights movement. I say all this to say that baby boomers, and particularly minority and marginalized parts of our community, were fighters. They were people that were on the front lines, protesting, rioting, yelling out loud, burning their bras, Stonewall riots, Martin Luther King. These were people that showed that shit was worth fighting for. But another movement also came from that era, and that is the moral majority. Now, many traditionalists and those trying to reignite this moral majority mindset in the current era want you to believe it's about religion, want you to believe it's about doing the right thing. But even if you go back to the birth of the moral majority and people like Jerry Falwell, it was never about their religion. It was about keeping Black people out of their schools and lining their pockets, using the people and the ignorance of people to keep them rich and in power. But here's the problem. Many people in Generation X were born at the end of all of these movements coming to fruition. And those Gen Xers, particularly those that look like me, didn't really think they had to fight for equality. They thought their parents had already done the work. This was a generation of latchkey kids, kids that had two working parents that were very independent and self-reliant and innovative, and they brought about the technology that started to change the future generations. And a lot of these individuals, particularly those that look like me and existed in the middle class, which at that time was a majority of us, they didn't actively participate in government. They were very apathetic. Like I said, as far as they were concerned, their parents already did all the work. They weren't voting. And I also want to point to the fact that during this time, members of the right were building coalitions, $1 million and now $1 billion coalitions that still exist. They were working behind closed doors because they weren't happy that we were progressing forward as a society. Enter millennials. Now, again, I am one of the oldest of the millennials, 1981 baby here. And so I didn't grow up necessarily with technology in my hand. I didn't have my first cell phone until I was like 20. But I did grow up with AOL and You've Got Mail and this introduction to be able to have conversations and interactions with people around the globe. Also, it gave new doors and avenues to catfishing and, unfortunately, child predatorial behavior online. But my generation also wasn't paying attention. My generation was told, we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about money. Those are all very private conversations. And even in my own house, which is private, we didn't talk about it. I never knew who my parents voted for. In fact, I never knew if they voted at all. But again, that wasn't the case with certain demographics. Those that were predominantly white and of a higher income status, they were talking about politics because they wanted to make sure that they maintained that status. They also wanted to bring back traditional values. So by and large, Republicans that had well-lined pockets were well-lining these coalitions again that were building up from the 50s forward. There was also a lot of conversations about these topics within Black and brown communities. Within the Black community, they are dealing with the aftermaths of segregation, the civil rights movement, redlining, Jim Crow laws, the list goes on. And so there was always an educational process happening in those households. With our brown communities, especially those that are immigrating here, there was an understanding that we need to be a part of the process and we need to talk about this because we are not original citizens and we want to make sure that we continue to participate so that we are benefited. And then came Generation Z, which I'm a parent of. And you grew up on the internet, online. Your entire lives are documented. I can go on my Facebook and see when my daughter was born and watch videos of her singing and dancing. She's 19 and in college. Your entire life has been on the internet. And as someone who graduated in 1999, the year Columbine happened, I also realized that we raised you in a fight or flight mindset. You grew up understanding that the simple act of going to the mall or going to a parade or going to your literal elementary school could mean the end of your life. And because of that, you look at life differently and you value it, but you also live in this heightened experience of emotion and anxiety, and it's real. And it's something that I entered into my phase of life when I was in my 30s. It became a reality for me. And I think sometimes because you recognize that you do have a voice that has reach that previous generations really didn't have, like on platforms like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and having the ability to share elements of your life and to get people motivated and inspired and to protest and come together and collaborate. It's important, but it also lacks something that this previous generation and the generations before me can help you understand. We did not get to a Trump presidency in 4 years, in 10 years. We got to it in decades, 50 plus decades of behind the scenes work from some of the richest, most elitist, most evil people that exist in this country. This man, Leonard Leo, when I was 10 years old, started a movement. He is responsible for the installation of every hyper-conservative that we have on the Supreme Court currently, from Clarence Thomas to Amy Coney Barrett. He is responsible for the installation of more than 300 federal judges across the nation. And this judicial takeover didn't happen overnight. It happened over the last 32 years since that man graduated college and joined the Federalist Society. So that brings me to one of the many videos I was tagged in.
Myself included, have withdrawn our support for Joe Biden as a presidential candidate. And this, understandably, has provoked the sentiment from a lot of liberals of it'll be worse under Trump, which I am not denying that in any way, shape, or form. But here's the thing. I was part of the vote blue no matter who crowd in 2020 because I knew that this country would not survive 4 more years of Donald Trump. So I held my nose, voted for Biden in the hope that maybe things would get better. And then they didn't. Roe v. Wade got overturned. Tons of states passed anti-LGBT legislation. Tons of civil rights were dismantled. And yeah, the Trump presidency might have set all these things in motion, but they only really came to fruition when Biden got elected.
So I appreciate that he acknowledges that the rolling back of Roe v. Wade and LGBTQ plus rights and civil rights across the nation are likely a product of Trump's presidency. But then he says, well, it happened under Biden's presidency, ignoring the fact that this is the long game. And if you think one election in 2020 where still only 66% of eligible voters showed up to vote is going to fix nearly 50 years of long-term game coming forth by Republicans, coalitions, ALEC, Federal Society, Heritage Foundation. I mean, the list goes on. This is a graph representing the voter turnout in presidential elections since the origination of our country. The black line at the top represents how many eligible voters there are in the nation. The blue represents how many Democrats had voted. The red represents how many Republicans voted. And the baseline down there represents maybe a third party or write-in, etc. This is where my earlier discussion talking about generational divide comes into play. In 1968, at the end of the civil rights movement, we see a significant shift. We see a massive uptick in Republican turnout and a decrease in Democratic turnout. We also see the divide of eligible voters and actual voters get bigger and bigger. Further proving that a lot of people thought the problems were solved because we had the civil rights movement, we had the women's rights movement, we had the movement for the LGBTQ plus community. But unfortunately, people like Jerry Falwell, Leonard Leo, Peter Thiel, the U-Lines, countless Republican millionaires and billionaires who invested in organizations that were collating together to roll back all of our rights. I need y'all to realize that, one, you don't have a plan. If Trump gets elected because you either don't show up or you vote third party, you don't have a plan. Number two, they've been planning for 50 years. And if you think one election was going to fix that, you haven't been paying attention. And that means showing up to every election, state elections, local elections, the midterms, putting your name on the ballot. And if we don't hold our nose one more time in 2024, we will have zero power to do anything moving forward. Zero.